Customer service in Nigeria many times is nothing to write home about.
Hi, Jojo. I have noticed that some service provider businesses tend to fail in their startup phase. Why do you think this happens?
Self-awareness is the foundation. The very first thing for any individual and business is self-awareness as a body and as an individual. Nothing can be done if the person isn't aware. If you're given that the service itself is flawless, would be that there is a lack of emotional intelligence. And this is just amongst other things. But the reason I'm touching on the emotional intelligence bit is because service providers interface with their clients, with their customers. You need to be able to connect. You need to be able to read the non-verbal cues. I will give an example. I recently went to a spa and the service itself was flawless, but there were quite a number of things that were wrong. For example, the masseuse didn't interact with me. I don't know if this is their policy, but I believe that if we're going to be in close contact, this is a massage we're talking about. She was touching my body. She should have asked 1 or 2 questions, something like, where should I focus on? Just to make sure that there's a connection. You see, beyond services, there has to be a connection. There has to be an understanding, a synchrony. And that can only happen if I know what emotional state. So more than the service, we're creating an experience. And there can be no experience if there's no connection. There can be no connection if there's no communication. But all of this boils down to one simple fact. People need to be trained. Beyond just offering services, people need to be trained on emotional intelligence. Say you started a business, you have everything it takes, and you're rendering the service, but you still struggle as a business owner or as a company. You need to become aware of the problem. You know, there's this saying, a problem half shared is half solved. You can't even share what you don't know. And many times the problem is right there, but because you're in the system, you won't see it. It takes someone from the outside to come in and see. So that's the first step, to become aware of a problem, to become aware of the gap that needs to be filled. I hope this answers the question.
How do we equip employees to self-regulate their emotions in high-pressure moments so they remain empathetic and solution-focused with customers?
We must give staff techniques. This comes again in the trainings. You need to educate them. So the first thing is, in order to understand, you must listen. Employees need to be trained to listen. If you can't listen, you won't understand. And if you don't understand, you will not be empathetic. Pause before responding. And I would even say, before responding, you might want to check in by rephrasing the question back to the client to just ensure that there's an understanding. Because sometimes, we do this thing where we've heard someone say something, but what you heard and what they said is different. So you always want to say it back to them. If a client comes into your business with a complaint, you want to ensure that you understand and teach your staff to use reflection exercise. Reflection exercises simply means being able to recognize their own emotional state and then adjusting their state in that real-time moment. The next is we want to teach trigger awareness. We all have triggers. One of my triggers is hunger. When I'm hungry, I become irritable. Avoid your triggers, especially in your place of work. You don't want to get triggered. It's really hard to provide solution when you yourself need regulation. So I would say avoid your triggers. And then lastly, do emotional check-ins. Check with your state. I find a lot of people don't even know. If I ask you now, how do you feel? There's this general word we use, I'm fine. But there's more to our emotions than just being fine. And I would say in addition to that is you need a wide range of vocabulary to be able to identify how you're feeling. So if you're worried, for example, say you're at work and you're worried about a bill, a payment you need to make, it will be really hard for you to connect with a customer when they're walking. You need to be able to check in with your emotional state. And there are things that you can do once you've identified your emotional state. There are things that you must do. So in order to do this, you must use a technique called grounding. Grounding is when you say back to them what you've heard them say. And so once an understanding is established, you are in a better position to meet their need. You're in a better position to empathize and provide solutions.
I want to ask a hypothetical question. I would paint a picture. Let's say an employee has personal troubles and struggles at home. Although heavy-hearted, they still have to work. Essentially, how do they function efficiently and meet the customer's needs without spewing the load of what they have going on at home?
We have to do what we call self-regulation. Self-regulation basically means the ability to calm yourself and then focus on the solution. I want you to understand that self-regulation is not a personality trait. It's an organizational skill that must be developed because we can't control the circumstances in our lives. We all go through things that just come up, and they very much have the ability to interfere. You know, when there is a situation in your life that has caused emotional rousing, emotions are such that when they come in, they don't just leave. They stay there. You have to deal with them. We a lot of times do what I call numbing, and it's a technique. Sometimes it's dysfunctional because when you numb, you become blind to another person's state. Numbing is not what we want to do here if you're offering a service. Everyone can self-regulate. That's the beautiful thing about self-regulation. Everyone has what it takes. It usually requires a cognitive awareness of, first of all, our own states, and then the techniques that we teach to self-regulate. So the techniques we teach to self-regulate, pretty basic. We can all do them. The first is breathing exercises. Breathing, as simple as it looks, does wonders in our bodies. It calms down our nervous system. Emotions and our nervous systems are very linked. In fact, that's our emotions stem from our nervous system. So to regulate yourself, you need to be able to calm your nervous system. And the fastest way is breathing exercises. You breathe in, hold it for like 4 seconds, and you exhale. By the time you do this for 2 or 3 counts, the part of your brain, which is your prefrontal cortex, would have been activated. And once there's an activation there, that's the part that does the executive thinking, problem solving. Once you activate that part of your brain, you go past your own emotional state. So like I said, the first one is breathing exercises. The second one is labeling your emotions. Label how you feel. If you don't have the right vocabulary, you can describe it. Start from there. Although we usually encourage people to know the names of what they're feeling. Once you're able to name it, there's a separation that happens in your brain. A separation, basically telling yourself that this is an emotion you're feeling and not you. Then loads of techniques, but I'll just leave it at this 2. However, they are not just taught, they have to be practiced. So if you own a business and you have staff with you, you must model it. You must. If you want your employees to practice this, you must practice it yourself. You must reinforce and you must reward self-regulation. There's something our brain does. Our brain likes rewards. Once you can attach a reward to a skill, the person is most likely to remember that skill when next they're in that situation. So reinforcement and reward is a big part of self-regulation, especially as a boss trying to model self-regulation.
What systems do we have in place to gather feedback on how customers feel after interactions? And how do we follow up on that emotional feedback?
One of the ways to become aware is to have feedback system. And I will mention 3 ways you can get feedback. Some organizations have boxes where you can drop your feedback. You can also fill a form, surveys, share your experiences, especially after a service has been rendered. And then the last one, emails. You can send emails to your customers and just ask them how it was. Because like I said, as a service provider, you don't want to focus on just the service. You also need to think about the experience, their experience. So when you're sending those emails, even in your survey or in the box where they drop their feedback, ensure there's a space for experience. Ask them, and how was your experience? How was your experience? Simple. You need to start from there. That is what stands you out.